Welcome everyone to today's Family Academy session. My name is Mary Snyder and I am the District Social Emotional Learning Specialist. Our session today is titled The Science of Sleep, and our subtitle is Building Healthier Sleep Routines for Teens and Kids. We have a special guest presenter today, and I'll introduce her, but I also just want to welcome our superintendent, Dr. Kathy Waite. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Waite, and we're so excited to be able to share Family Academy with our community, educators, families, everyone who is interested in just building stronger connections with each other and just the ways that we can come together to help and support each other. So we're going to answer the question today, why do we need to sleep? And I want to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. And also just mention that for several years, our district has partnered with an organization called Neural Education, which translates neuroscience research into practical teaching and learning tools. And Audrey, we can go ahead to the next slide for this. And so neural education, as I was saying, translates research, neuroscience research into practical teaching and learning tools. And these tools can be applied in classrooms. And today we're going to be talking about how to apply these ideas to help families. Over 70 of our district staff members are certified neural educators, and many more of our district staff have participated in focused training around neuroscience. Today, we're really happy to welcome Audrey Gallagher as our guest speaker. She is one of the lead facilitators for neural education, and she currently works as an administrator in the Kent School District. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here. To share a little bit about my role, I am a multi-tiered system of support coach. So I work with our teams on building strong systems to support all of our scholars as they move through throughout their educational careers with a really specific focus on social emotional learning and looking really deeply at our practices to make sure that they're equitable and driven towards culturally responsive teaching practices, which I love neural education because it gives us such a strong foundation in really reaching all of our students, because brain is brain, and once you understand the brain, you can understand so much more about how we can reach our learners in better ways. So my first question for all of you tonight is, how much sleep, if you think back to how much sleep did you get last night? Was it in approximate hours? You can count half hours if you want, but tonight we're going to be thinking about how much sleep did we get. So let's just start off with how much. If you want to put it in the chat, that'll help me kind of get a sense of where we are at, and then you can do a self-assessment when we further on in the presentation to see if you're getting as much sleep as you might need. 5 to 6, 6, 6 to 7. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Move on. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. So Mary's going to bring us into the challenge mosaic.
Yeah, so today we're going to use a framework called the Challenge Mosaic. And I encourage you, if you're able to, if it's convenient for you, to have a piece of paper and something to write with, or maybe you're someone who likes to take notes electronically, that's fine. I just want to give everyone a second to to gather a pen and paper. This is something we haven't done in Family Academy before, but it is a process that we do use often in training and with many of our students, actually, because when we take you through the Challenge Mosaic cycle, it really helps us to make our thinking visible, to kind of articulate the things that we're thinking about in a little bit more structured way, and helps us to recognize the new understandings that we develop. So The challenge mosaic begins with posing a challenge question, and then it invites you to record your initial thoughts. And just wanting to let you know that these notes are just for yourself. We're not going to be asking you to share out your initial thoughts. We're not going to ask you to type them in the chat box or to tell us in any way. It's just a place for you to kind of jot down your own thinking. It's a way for you to make your thinking visible to yourself, and as I said, to help recognize new understandings as we move through today's session. So our question is, why do we need to sleep? So if you do have a pen and paper, let's take a moment to write this question on our papers. Why do we need to sleep? And now we're going to just take 1 minute to write our initial thoughts. And this might feel a bit awkward because we've never done this before during Family Academy, but I encourage you to try the process. If you don't have pen and paper, just take this minute to kind of make a list in your head. Why do we need to sleep? Okay, so we'll take 1 minute. Ready, begin.
10 seconds. And time. Now we're going to move into our multiple perspectives. So there are many reasons, things that we should do to get good sleep, or things that we should do to stay in good health every day. Things like exercise, eat well, drink water, the list goes on and on. But for some reason, sleeping often isn't a high priority. When we all recognize that sleep needs to be a prioritized. Quality sleep is actually vital to our health and mental health. So let's start with listing a few key reasons why your body and mind need sleep. It improves brain function. So when we get a good night's sleep, we are more alert and clear-headed. Things like learning, problem solving, and decision making are easier. But when we lose sleep, our brain's performance suffers. We can be foggy and slow to react. Chronic sleep loss can impair our judgment, leading to serious accidents. In fact, being tired is one of the leading causes of fatal car crashes. You know, sleep also keeps our emotions in check. When we're fully rested, we're better able to control our emotions and our behavior. For example, without adequate sleep, adults may experience mood swings and children may have tantrums or trouble getting along with others. Sleep reduces the risk of disease. So people with ongoing sleep deprivation have increased risk of heart disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and stroke. In addition, lack of sleep also affects our immune system. Individuals who are sleep deficient have a harder time fighting common viruses like a cold or the flu. And then finally, sleep really helps to keep our weight under control. Sleep deprivation affects our body's ability to regulate appetite hormones. So those who have poor sleep habits tend to have bigger appetites and eat more than those who are not sleep deprived. In fact, a study revealed that adults who are sleep deprived were 55% more likely to become obese. So if you're trying to lose weight, getting a good night's sleep is critical. And then since we are in an educational setting, we really want to think about that sleep is when the learning that happens during the day is when it is really strengthened. So anything, you're a group, neural educators, I know you understand about these processes. And so we know that when we sleep, that's when all of the things that we've learned throughout the day get strengthened. And so we'll talk even more about that as we go through this presentation. So what if children don't get enough sleep? We know that they get dysregulated, they're content towards hyperactivity, tantrums, crying, lower test scores, increased risk of metabolic syndrome, and decreased muscle growth. I know when I had young children at home and we were, getting out of a routine, if you went to visit family or went to do something that was meant that you didn't get an afternoon nap, that was often the time that you would hear the crying and throwing yourselves on the ground and just that dysregulation, because they really needed that sleep to help them stay regulated. So oftentimes when I'm planning with my teams around students' needs, one of the questions I often will ask is, how are sleep going for your child? What are the things that are going well for them, and what are the things that aren't going well? Because we as parents, we know if our child is getting enough sleep by their regulation. And if we aren't getting enough sleep, we definitely can become very dysregulated. I know even for myself, I might know as I step into my workday, last night I didn't have a good night's sleep. So that might be a cue for me to be like, I'm going to need to take extra breaths. Maybe I need to go for a walk. Maybe I need extra water. Maybe I need to call and connect with somebody because I know that my neurotransmitters are out of balance and I need to do something to kind of boost them up and make myself feel a little bit better, because I know going into this day that my sleep is not quite where I want it to be. So how much sleep do we need? And you can find lots of different information on that. We know from our babies need a lot of sleep, 14 to 17 hours, all the way to 7 to 8 hours. And so really what's important about sleep is to recognize how much sleep do you personally need. Some of us are going to function really well on 5 to 6 hours sleep. Some of us are really going to need 9 to 10 hours of sleep. So really recognizing that. And I think something parents maybe need to hear a little bit is, our teenagers, they need more sleep than they think, and that even than we think. 8 to 10 hours is really what's recommended. And so, that means kind of taking them and really doing some planning, because we have to do backwards planning for sleep. Because I know when my teenagers were at home, it was 11 o'clock and they were still wandering around the house and eating food and doing homework. And I'm like, you have to get up at 7 o'clock. So there's no way for you to get enough sleep. So some of this is just being really proactive and just understanding in order for them to be able to engage in really good learning at school and be regulated in their lives, having enough sleep is a really big part of that. So what we know from the research is that 90% of our teens are not sleeping enough. They're not sleeping that recommended 8 to 10 hours per night. And we also know that lack of sleep can lead to multiple negative health effects, including things like depression, anxiety, obesity, lack of growth. So if your child is an athlete, it's really important for them to get enough sleep, to prioritize getting enough sleep, because that's when their bones and all of the structures that they've practiced in the day also are growing in night. So not only our our brain structures, but also our body structures really need sleep to be able to really reach our full potential. We really know that during sleep, that's when all of our learning gets consolidated. That's when all of those pathways, everything that we have practiced during that day, that's when it really gets strengthened. And anything that, so if you think about the people in your life, what are the patterns you notice in their behavior that could be associated with sleep? We know from the research of Dr. Daniel H. Pink that our adolescents tend to be night owls. So given the choice, they'll go to bed later in the evening and then wake up later in the morning. Many of us have probably noticed that trend as we move into, um, you know, especially back in the spring when our schedules were kind of off and we were trying to figure out how to do school in a new way. If we give our children to wake up on their own, they're going to wake up much later. So this is
I was thinking about this, Audrey, when we were doing the research for tonight's presentation, and really making a connection to my own son, who is a sophomore in college this year. But just like many other college students in the spring, you know, he came home in March and finished out his spring semester at home. And he had been away, you know, for his freshman year. And what I was experiencing with him is that, and maybe this was his routine at college, but I was really kind of thrown off by his routine, which was that he would start studying maybe at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then he would study through the night. And sometimes I might wake up in the middle of the night and he would still be, you know, doing schoolwork. And in the beginning, when he was home, it started to cause us to have some tension and some really contention between us, where I was like, you got to go to sleep, you got to get up, you have this whole schedule. And what over the course of the semester, what I came to realize was that it was less important that he was going to bed at the time I thought he should go to sleep and waking up at the time I thought he should wake up, but more important that he was actually getting the 8 to 10 hours, right, of sleep. And so when I kind of shifted my own thinking around, you know, because he was smart and gave himself a class that started at 10 a.m., he didn't have to get up at 7, right? I shifted the conversation with him away from this is what time you should go to sleep to how can you make sure you get 8 to 10 hours of sleep? And I think, you know, that's different for school age kids, and for high school kids, they are going to school earlier in the mornings. And so we need to kind of backward plan that, right? So if you do have to get up at 7 in the morning, then what time do you need to go to sleep in order to make sure you get the 8 to 10 hours? Or if you have to get up at 6 in the morning, what time do you have to go to sleep? And that, I know that's something that's coming up in your presentation, but just really thinking about, and we're going to talk about this too, the circadian rhythms and all of those things and how those change with our age, right? And with our development, our circadian rhythm patterns can change too. So just kind of being aware of that. I really like what you said earlier about knowing yourself and the sleep needs that you have, and kind of thinking about all these elements and how to make sure that I am getting sleep that is not causing me to have increased anxiety or depression, and that I'm able to consolidate my learning and get my good muscle growth.
Thanks, Mary. So we're going to share a video from John Medina. He did a lot of work around brain rules. So I'll go ahead and play this video and we'll talk about it.
We are beginning to get a handle on why it is that we sleep, and it's weird. It's another one of those unexpected, really weirdly unexpected things, and here's the way you can show it. You put a rat through a maze, and you've got a bunch of electrodes stuck in its head, okay? You record the pattern of electrical firing as the rat learns to negotiate through the maze. Does that make sense? Pretty soon you see the rat has a maze-learned pattern. And you can actually watch the rat as the rat is going through the maze, deploying that pattern over and over again. Does that make sense? If you leave the electrode on at night while the rat is asleep, at a very particular stage in the rat's sleep, you see something so weird that I think when it was first encountered, some people didn't believe it. The rat replays the entire learned sequence thousands of times, over and over again, at night. At night. It's called offline processing. Lovely term, huh? Offline processing. There is a strong suggestion that if you've recruited something for long-term storage and you want to remember it, The 10-year journey, or however long that journey actually is, begins the night after you've learned it. In which case, the brain rule says, sleep well, think well. What it really means is that sleep is unbelievably important to learning. And it may be, you can now show this to be true in humans. When you learn something, you will replay it over and over again in your head at night. And if we disrupt your sleep at a very particular stage, you will quit learning and you have to relearn it. In fact, you can show that with the maze, with the rats, with the maze. When you disrupt the sleep right in the time when they're repeating that thousands of times, they have to go back and relearn the maze. They didn't remember it. So it may be that sleep is an unbelievable partner in learning, not because it makes you less drowsy. You need to sleep to shut everything off so you can pay close attention to what's going on inside.
Wow, that's just so powerful to think about. So really, it replays that entire learned sequence. How powerful is that? When we are sleeping, the things that we practice throughout the day gets replayed over and over and strengthened, and all of those pathways get faster and faster and stronger and stronger. And if it gets disrupted, that also has an impact on what we remember and how we remember. So thinking about that from a parent perspective, it really is important to think about, what is the quality of my child's sleep? How can I support co-creating solutions with you about your sleep? And really just thinking about what are the pieces that are really important, because we know that it really gives us that opportunity to reinforce our learning and the things that we've done. And, there's just so many great benefits to sleep.
We are beginning to get a handle on why.
Sorry. So one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about is our circadian rhythm. And so I want to kind of orient you to this image, because when you first look at it, we kind of look at it and we think of it like a clock, but this is a 24-hour clock. So if we think about, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if we think about our day starting at 6 o'clock, so that would be sunrise, so right up here, that is when we have the sharpest rise in our blood pressure. That's when our cortisol increases in the morning, gets us moving, our melatonin secretion starts, and all of this happens kind of with the light. So if we think about the sun rising and the sun setting, those are the kind of times that our body is naturally, if we just let our natural rhythms happen, we would follow the sunrise and the sunset in a much more synchronous way than we do right now, because we have a lot of artificial light that tells our brains that this is morning time when it may in fact be nighttime. So if we think about as we move through the day, our best coordination time is around 2:30. Our good reaction time is around 3:30. And then at 6 o'clock, this is when our body starts to give us signals that it's time to start thinking about winding down. So around 9 o'clock, and this will be different depending on what your personal bedtime routine is. But around 9 o'clock is when our melatonin starts to increase in our body, our cortisol starts to go down, and Mary's going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And so if we think about our circadian rhythm, we're really thinking about really backwards planning. We want to be thinking about heading to bed around this 9 o'clock time period. I was working on, ironically, some sleep things with my daughter, and the neurologist even made the suggestion that, really thinking about having dim lights, even considering if you want to have some red light lamps that really kind of tone down the light that's in your living spaces in the evening time. So I've really learned to turn all the overhead lights off, have just a soft lamp, just try to create that sense that it is night. Try to trick my brain into thinking that it is, nighttime, because we're not really designed to have artificial light all day long. So So really, circadian rhythms are how your body knows what time it is. So when it's time to get up, when it's time to sleep, you probably will even notice that when you go on a holiday, and your body's going to wake you up at the time that you normally wake up, even if you're in a different time zone. So our body kind of gets wired. I think about when we moved to Hawaii, I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me because I was like cratering at 9 o'clock. And I was like, I never go to bed at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is, I'm a night person. How come I'm going to bed? But it had everything to do with the sun. 2 hours after sunset, 7 o'clock, the sun would go down, and it was pretty consistent across the year. So my body was saying, time to go to bed because it's 2 hours after the sunset. So our body falls into those natural circadian rhythms. Just without our permission. So we have to be intentional in our very lit world to think about ways to create new pathways for or new routines.
It's so interesting, your story, Audrey, and I hadn't had this thought before, but you're talking about Hawaii made me think of a couple of different other examples. One being I moved here to Washington from Arizona. And one of the things that I recognized when I moved here in the summer was, here the sun sets so late at night in the summer, and the kids are still out and about in the neighborhood 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. We don't even realize that it's that late because of how the sun sets. And that has to do with latitude, right? And so that was something that, being from Arizona, was a kind of a surprise to me. I hadn't had that experience before. And then the other thought I had, and maybe this is funny to other people, it is to me though. When I visited Las Vegas, do you know how, if you've ever been in Las Vegas, you can't ever really tell what time it is? Have you guys noticed that? It's like, and the description that you just gave, I think it's probably because of all the lights, and you're just walking around downtown and you don't even know that it's nighttime. And it's like our minds are tricked by the light. And so this recognition of how our mind is affected by the amount of light, the amount of sunlight and nighttime sort of ratio that we build into our life that's really interesting. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that comment in the chat box. Yeah, they design it that way to keep you out spending your money, right? Yeah, exactly. So thanks.
Well, and I grew up in Northern Canada, and I remember being a kid and being like, it's not time to go to bed. It's still light out, because it would stay light out till 11 and 11:30 at night. So it was really hard to go to sleep because my brain was like, it's not bedtime. It's not dark. So yeah. So just thinking about light and how that impacts us is really kind of just something to keep in the back of our minds as we are creating routines with our families.
So the most important factor that does impact your circadian rhythm is your body's experience with light and darkness. And that means to us that one of the best ways to set your circadian clock is to be exposed to bright sunlight or to bright light. Ideally, it's sunlight during the day, but then at night, be in the dark. And experiencing bright light during the day tells your brain and your body to increase the production of hormones like cortisol so that you can focus your energy and be more productive. So when Audrey was showing us the visual that kind of looked like a clock, one of the things that was kind of highlighted on that is the beginning of the production of cortisol in our bodies at sunrise. And so cortisol, we often think about it as a negative hormone because it is what spikes when we're feeling stressed. But there are good amounts of cortisol, so we can have a productive amount of cortisol in our bodies. And that's because cortisol is the hormone that helps us focus our energy, helps us be really more productive. It assists in controlling blood sugar levels, regulating our metabolism, and it assists with memory formulations. And so as the day turns to night and we become less exposed to bright light, our brain and our body begins to decrease the production of cortisol and begins to release melatonin. And many of us have heard about melatonin. Your body starts releasing melatonin about 2 hours before you normally go to bed. And that's because it helps to prepare your body for sleep. And so that increase in melatonin makes you feel sleepy, lowers your body's temperature. And so this graph shows us sort of the ideal relationship between cortisol and melatonin in our bodies. So ideally, there should be kind of an exchange in the levels of cortisol and melatonin throughout our day. So one of the things we often say to our kids, we'll say, get outside. The sunlight is really good for you. I actually thought that about myself earlier today. Like, they say it's going to snow this week, maybe. I got to get out there while I see the sun because I need that sunlight to help me actually sleep better tonight. And this graph helps us understand why. Sunlight exposure during the day is probably the single most important thing you can do to support the normal production of melatonin in the evening and to sort of ensure this exchange relationship between cortisol and melatonin in your body. So one thing that, and Audrey was kind of mentioning this, melatonin production can be inhibited by exposure to bright light indoors, especially in the evening. And one major source of indoor bright light for us and for our kids is technology. So the blue light that's emitted from the screens we interact with, from our TVs, from our computers, our iPads, our phones, almost anything with the screen is emitting that bright blue light. And if we just take a second to do a quick inventory of our exposure to screens and our kids' exposures to screens, we will quickly realize, right, the impact that that we're probably seriously impacting our melatonin production and our circadian rhythm through the use of this technology.
So the University of Lincoln did a study on some preteens, and what they found is that preteens who looked at media within an hour of bedtime, those who looked at media in a room with lights turned on, were, let's do this together. I want to do some cognitive rehearsal. So 10, 20, 31% less sleep than those who did not use the screen. But if they looked at their screen or their technology or their thing with the blue light on it, they got, let's do this together, 147. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 147% less sleep. So if you take nothing away from tonight, please take this information. Looking at your screen in the dark has a really significant impact on your sleep and your ability to get sleep. So that is one thing that I'm super committed to. I'm not always great about not looking at my screen before bed, but I am committed to making sure if I am on my technology that I do have a light on in the room. So there's external factors that impact sleep. Artificial light, we've spent some time really talking about that. Noise, if you live in a noisy place, your brain gets habituated to it. But if you move somewhere new and let's say you have a fire station or a hospital nearby, in the beginning, you'll notice that you're not going to get as much sleep because you're going to hear that noise and that traffic. Over time, your brain stops paying attention to it. But in the beginning, it can be really loud. Or if you live over an airplane traffic pattern or near a noisy highway, medications can have an impact on sleep. So the timing of them can be really important. Diet drinks with caffeine. I know that I cannot drink anything, even a Diet Coke later in the evening. It totally throws off my sleep schedule. Hormone levels our work schedules. People that have to work shift work have to kind of navigate back and forth between different schedules, and that can be really challenging. And then daylight savings time has an impact on our sleep. You know, if you wake up it's kind of fine on the day where you spring forward, but when you fall back, or when you fall back, it's fine. But when you spring forward, you're like, why am I so tired? It's really can be quite challenging. And then really just ambient temperature, really thinking about, I always sleep with the window open, and that just helps to keep the room at a temperature that's just kind of just right for me. So, you know, you have to play around with that. If my feet are cold, I can't sleep. If I go on a hike and I'm in the woods and I'm trying to sleep outside, I'm always too cold. And so it's either too cold or too hot, right? So that temperature can really have an impact on our sleep. And then really, you know, we've said it's super important, that sleep is important. So now what? What can we as a community do? What can we do as parents do? So I'm really a big believer in sort of co-creating that routine with our children. Think about what their routine is, and do some backwards planning. You know, if you're going to get 8 hours of sleep, you know, how long does it take you to get ready to go to sleep? You know, what are those pieces that we can kind of put into place? So really having a consistent bedtime, that's something that I started to do. My alarm clock rings at 9:30 every night, and that sends me a message that it's time to start my sleep routine. And I try to be in bed by 10 o'clock with everything shut off every day. And that routine is like, I just go straight to sleep every night. And I'm fortunate, I'm a good sleeper. That's not something that's typically a challenge for me. But I think if you struggle with sleep, having that routine can really be important. You know, setting a bedtime for electronics 1 hour before bedtime. If you can get, you know, more sleep, that is super important. You know, if you have younger children, it's going to be a harder sell on the teenagers potentially. But if you have younger children, set that routine early. Have those charging stations outside of the bedroom. We know that just having the technology near us wakes us up and draws our attention. So if we can have a place for it to go to bed, that's even better for everything, for our overall wellness. You know, so that consistent bedtime routine, what are the things that your child, you know, likes to do? Is it a bath or a shower? Is there some kind of yoga or meditation or prayer or reading a story? Connection time. What are those routines that kind of send that message to our body that it's, you know, the lights are coming down. We're going to read a story. We get to pick those things that we think about when our children are younger, but are just as important as they get older as well. And then just that whole idea of the temperature of the bedroom, you know, trying to make sure that it's the right temperature for them to get the sleep that they need. So Mary has done a great job of creating some tools that you can use. Do you want to talk through some of these, Mary?
So we talked about co-creating a bedtime routine, and I think, you know, there's some really key words to that. First of all, the co-creating process, that this is something that you want to partner with your family on, with your children on, so that it feels like they have some choice, they have some control over what is going to be the routine before I go to sleep. So this is just one that I just put together, and clearly these are things that are important to me and my family. Turn your device off, take some time to relax. It feels like Wesley was always wanting that last drink of water. So put that in the schedule. Drink water, eat a light snack, no sugar, no caffeine, keep it cool, make sure it's dark. Now, as a family, you might like this, your child might like this, but you might want to, I'm encouraging you to join in this co-creation process. So there's also a slide that's kind of blank. So an example slide, and then here where you could create your own structure. What are the things that your child thinks are important? What are the things that help your child fall asleep and stay asleep? So that's one example model. And then I have a second one. This one, just like a different visual aspect to it. But again, I put some ideas in there for examples, and then there'll be a second slide where you can fill in the steps that are important for you and your child, your family. And this is a resource that I'll share on our district website. After tonight, the recording of the session will be shared on the website. And then I will also add these slides as well so that you can edit them, print them, co-create this with your family as well. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentation, and we're at the stage of the challenge mosaic cycle where we have shared a lot of information, and we want to give you a second to reflect while that information is still fresh in your mind. And so we're going to take 2 minutes, and in this 2 minutes, just maybe think about these questions. What was surprising to you in tonight's presentation? What did you already know but now see in a new way? And what questions might you still have? What do you want help with? So we're going to take 2 minutes, and if you want to grab your pen and paper again, if you want to just kind of take this 2 minutes to think in your mind about these 3 questions. Ready, begin.
Ten seconds.
I want to thank you so much, Audrey, for sharing with us today. And as we are kind of coming to the end of the session, I just want to open it up for any family members or any of tonight's participants. If you'd like to share any of your answers to the 3 questions, or if you have questions for Audrey, let's take advantage of her expertise and her willingness to kind of share with us around this topic. So what was surprising to you? What did you know but now see in a new way? What do you want help with? I'm just going to pause, feel comfortable unmuting or adding any comments into the chat box if you have questions or want to share your thoughts. Yeah. Want to say thank you to all the families who joined us. Audrey and I are going to stay on in case there are any questions. If you are hoping to talk with her directly, we'll stay on, and just want to thank you again, let you know that we will post the video for today's session on our webpage, as well as the other resources. So if you have other family members who weren't able to join us, if you know other families that would really like to kind of check in and get the information, it'll be there on our website. So look for our next Family Academy. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thanks for being here.